Hello, everyone, and welcome to Building SaaS on AWS, the flagship show for SaaS here on the AWS Twitch channel. My name is Gunnar Grosch. I'm a developer advocate at AWS. And if you are building or planning to build a SaaS product, well, this is the show for you. What we do here is that we deep dive into SaaS-specific topics so you can learn more about building SaaS on AWS. And every week or every other week when we have the show, I'm joined by SaaS experts to then deep dive into those topics. And we want the show to be highly interactive. So if you have any questions, any comments, just post them in the chat. And well, my expert guests will do their best to answer those. And by the end of the hour, well, hopefully all of us have learned a lot of new things around SaaS. All right, so this week I'm happy to be joined by our recurring guest, Bill from AWS SaaS Factory, and Ben from Cloudar. So welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Let's do the quick round of introductions as usual. Bill, let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, Gunnar, it's good to be on again. As you said, we've, SaaS Factor, we've been on the show quite a few times. We're heavily involved in the planning and the structure of the show. We like to help put the shows together. But a little bit about our team. In general, our team provides guidance and best practices for building SaaS on AWS. I want to quickly call out that we're also joined by another member of my team, Anthony McClure, who's there in the chat. He's moderating today. He's already said hi to everybody. But in terms of how our team interacts with customers, we usually do deep dive engagements to help customers build SaaS on AWS. But also we try to get out into the community as much as possible and find ways to connect with the SaaS community. So if you're interested in SaaS, even if you have general questions about SaaS, feel free to post them into the chat. We love talking about SaaS. This is what Anthony and I do all day. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to either ask in the chat or reach out to us directly. You can find us on LinkedIn as well. So nice to meet you, everybody.
Thanks, Bill, and welcome. And then Ben, of course. Welcome to the show, Ben.
All right, thanks for having me. Very much looking forward to talking with you two. My name is Ben. I live in Belgium. I work for a premier AWS consulting partner called Cloudar, where we do basically everything AWS and only AWS. So we do from like reselling and like cost optimization to consulting services and completely managing customers' environments, and everything that falls in between all of that. So we have like both people working internally for us that are doing that managed services stuff, and then we have like consultants going out to customers or being on site in customer teams, working with them to figure out like what's the best way to build on top of AWS.
All right, so Cloudar, you work for them, but besides that, you are also something called an AWS Hero, Ben. So maybe we can do a shout out to the Heroes program and tell people a bit about what AWS Heroes are.
Yes, like I've been lucky that as part of working for Cloudar, I've been able to spend time not just working on things internally, but also like bringing things out to the community externally. I sometimes just like call it shit posting on Twitter, or like in the future maybe not Twitter anymore. But basically, like I try to like go out and like tell people like what I've learned, what we've learned, what we see in the industry. And part of doing that, I've been recognized by AWS both in the Ambassador program, which is a partner program. It's for people doing that kind of stuff that are working for an AWS partner, but also as part of the AWS Hero program, which is for everyone, right? It's not just for people working for partners. It's for anyone doing community stuff with AWS.
Well, super excited to have you in the Hero program, Ben, and very excited to have you on the show, of course, as well. And Cloudar, well, usually the partners that we have on this show, they are the traditional SaaS builders. So they build some sort of SaaS product or solution and offer that to their customer. But Cloudar, as you mentioned, we come from a different angle there. So Cloudar is what you call an MSP or a managed service provider.
Yes. And like this happened because like I met Bill and we started talking and we realized that the things we do at Cloudar and like our needs that we have as Cloudar are very similar to like both things that our SaaS are doing, but also things that SaaS buyers are doing. Like we have our own customers that want to use SaaS, either that they use in their accounts or that they want us to manage for them. But also being an MSP provider, we have to do like a lot of things in a lot of different AWS accounts, and like where we're all in AWS, so we don't like reinventing the wheel for all the new things. So we always are on the lookout of like which SaaS can like help us provide better services to our customers, both like AWS services that we can leverage and also like external companies that we can that way roll out, which is like very similar. We found like if I'm doing like more consultancy type stuff, how enterprises work. Like basically our like MSP team is very similar to what the cloud enablement team would be doing inside of a big enterprise.
Yeah, and a managed service provider in itself, that's a term that's been used broadly throughout the industry with doing the types of things that you're talking about. But maybe you can give us a bit more detail about the AWS MSP program.
Yes. So the AWS MSP program is actually like a program that comes with an external certification. So if like an external 2-day audit that like it's not like it's mandatory by AWS but not run by AWS, that like comes talk to like the companies in that MSP program, make sure that they doing everything what AWS calls a next generation MSP, which means that we're like heavily focused on automation, modernization, integration, security, all those things you would expect from someone who's building like a well-architected way, combining that with like all the traditional, also well-architected, like more traditional, like service management things, like having a service desk, having processes for change management, for incident management, all those things, like combining all those things and making sure that customers can like build on top of that and have their environment both managed, but also not being like just like we set up a server for you and like you have like a virtual machine and that's it. Like actually AWS native managed services.
So with that as a primer maybe to this episode, what does MSP have to do with SaaS then, to tie these things together?
I think there's like a couple different things. Like in some ways we're a SaaS provider. Like we have customers, they come to us and say like, we want an AWS account. We want it to be, I'm going to like say secure as like a thing. But basically like we need things in there, like backup should be taken and we want to be sure that they're taken. There should be, like we want to be sure that we're like managing our costs. Like we have like, want to like split it out in certain ways. We want to be certain that we're doing patching and like not having to like set all those things up ourselves. Like not everyone's going to like set up their own patching environment. Like we want to have like a central environment that they then can rely on us for them to run it. They probably want cloud posture management, which is like looking at your AWS account, making sure that configuration follows your compliance standards. And we have both like enterprises as customers and we have like small businesses or like startups as customers. And they both want that, right? So in a certain way, like you have the same kind of, how do we solve this at scale so that we can like sell this as a service to our customers? Like we have the same problems of how do we manage all that things? Like if we want to have, let's say patching in every account, like we want to do it the same way everywhere, like the same product that does that patching. And then like we have some customers that say like patch everything immediately as soon as possible. And we have some customers that say we have like patch windows and like we can patch everything like once every month, like in that, like between those 2 hours, which is something that we found is something that like SaaS companies are also getting questions. Like they have customers that say like, I want just like give me the latest and greatest. and just like one, like the general thing you give to everyone is perfect for me. And then you have maybe more enterprise customers that have requirements that say like, I want my own special flavor of your SaaS. And like finding ways to manage that where it's like manageable for us as like a relatively small company, like there are 50 people in our company, is something that like we deeply have to think about, like making sure that we can actually scale and onboard more customers without that being like a one-to-one. We have to like every time we onboard a customer, we have to hire a new person to come manage it, which is not something we want to do.
Yeah. Just to jump in on that too. It was funny. I started talking to Ben last year, and the more we talked about what he was doing, the more similarities I started to hear for what we were talking to SaaS customers about. So a lot of enterprises out there, some use MSPs, some don't. But when I talk to an enterprise that's managing SaaS software on their own, it's almost the exact same concerns that Ben is talking about. So your SaaS customers have a lot of common concerns that you may not be hearing from them universally. And it's a really interesting spot that an MSP is in because they represent many different customers. So Ben has a really broad view of what SaaS customers are asking of SaaS providers and what some of the challenges, in fact, that SaaS, that people consuming SaaS might be experiencing. And I think we'll get into some of those today, but just for the audience's perspective, think about Ben in this episode to some extent as somebody who's a proxy for many of your customers. And it's a really interesting spot that he's in with a lot of visibility into the challenges that SaaS customers are facing today.
And I really like that analogy there to the enterprise because not many people know this, but I've spent many years in a managed service provider capacity working for a partner. And the traditional thing that we did a lot of was asset management, keeping track of be it software licenses that they've purchased or computers or servers or whatever it might be. And that has now turned more and more into subscriptions instead. So it's a lot about tracking the different types of software that they are paying per seat, perhaps the typical SaaS way of subscribing to software. So yeah, definitely resonates. Almost PTSD.
It is a fun but challenging place to be in.
Yeah. So you talked about security, Ben, and we'll probably get even more into this, but part of it, of course, is compliance in different ways. And how do you see that part of it? We know the different types of ISO certifications or SOC and so on that are available and almost a requirement for many today.
Yes. For us, I think there are, being like a European Belgian company, like three big compliance things we have to worry about. And like that we are worrying about and our customers are also worrying about. Like you have the general ones, GDPR, we're in Europe, like we have to be aware of that and like take care of that. We have ISO, which is, we have our customers are asking, we want to work with a partner that's ISO certified. So we are ISO certified, which also means that we have to do vendor management, for example. So we have to ask our vendors and the SaaS products that we use about how do they manage all the things that are in like an ISO certification. And then lastly, for us specifically, we have that MSP audit, where there's like also like a lot of requirements, like in a lot of domains. I think there's like 13 or 14 different domains, from like how good do you know AWS and like how broad is your AWS portfolio, to also like how healthy is your business, and like do you, and then like in between all those things, like how do you actually build on things, how do you deploy things, how do you manage security, and like also like again the same thing that's in those ISO things, like how do you manage vendors, how do you manage data security, which means that like we have to like do all those things, right? Like there's like for multiple reasons. Like first, it makes good business sense to like manage your vendors, like you said, like that's not just like to know how much like you're paying somewhere and like how much you have to bill your customers maybe, but also just like knowing who your vendors are and what they're doing with your data is like a good thing. And then we have like the 2 compliance requirements that are also saying like, yeah, you have to like For ISO specifically, like you have to do vendor management. And then for MSP, there are even some requirements about like if you use a vendor, then they have to like be as secure as the way you would do it yourself with the within the MSP, right? So we're not allowed, for example, to use access keys. Like we can't like create an access key in a customer account for us to have access to that account. We have to use roles and like short-lived credentials and all those kind of things.
And when you say that you're not allowed to, is where does that requirement come from?
It's internal compliance requirement. Like we think it's a good idea, but it's also part of the MSP audit. Looks at how do you log into your customer accounts, and like especially for like system, like it's split out like the same way it's split out in the well-architected framework, and like system access of your machines accessing things and like people accessing things, and have like different requirements. But basically there's like both have to be secure, and like you have to manage your root account. Like the same thing you will actually see if you like do the well-architected framework and like go to security things there, where like use short-lived credentials, like protect your root account, are things that for us are actually checked by an auditor to see that we're actually doing that.
So there are basically 3 ways where these requirements are important. One from your customer, the one that's gonna buy a SaaS product. Then it's on you that you are actually following ISO 9001 or whatever it might be. And then on the SaaS provider that they are compliant with whatever requirement that the end customer then has as well. And then it's basically you are the party that then makes sure that that is followed.
Yeah,
or in
and like,
at least.
Exactly. Like there's some things where we like look at like the documentation that the vendor has publicly. If it's like a more negotiation phase or like actually trying things out, we might send like a questionnaire to the vendor to say like, are you doing these things? Like, are you, in our case, we ask like, are you ISO, I think it's 27001 certified? Like, do you have that certification? Then we can like skip all these questions. If you're not, like, fine, we can like still work with you. Like, it's not that we can't use your product, but now like this is a list of questions, right? That we have to like go over to see that you're doing equivalent things to that.
Right. I just to echo that, and I say this to SaaS providers every time I talk to them. In the US, in North America, SOC 2 maybe is a little bit more prevalent than ISO 27001. In some ways, they're equivalents. But if you're not getting those compliances early as a SaaS provider, by the time you're talking to Ben or talking to an enterprise customer, you're several months too late to be trying to get to those compliance frameworks. It takes months to achieve the compliance with those different frameworks. There's different products that can accelerate them. AWS has some products like Security Hub and Config that can make things a little bit easier to be able to track those things. But there's still a lot of manual work, right? You've got a lot of controls that are, do you have documentation in place for disaster recovery? What's your plan if your office catches on fire? Things that you can't just, check a box really quick. You've got to have binders of data. If you're not doing those things ahead of time, by the time you're talking to Ben, you're going to have to fill out a long questionnaire that's a lot harder. Right?
I'm lucky. We have a security officer, so I get to like have him ask all those questions.
That is good, right? Yeah, awesome.
So you, Ben, mentioned next-gen MSP before. Maybe you can just tell us a bit about this spectrum of MSPs. The next-gen being, I guess, what you are or aiming for, compared to the ones that I maybe represented once back way back when.
I'm not going to say that. That's something you said. I like to think it's very similar to the way you look at, like, I like to call it cloud enablement teams, but how you go from like, we have like a central operations team, like a central ops team that like or security team or like a central whatever team where you send like requests to, and then they will set up our infrastructure, and then like 2 months later we get back like, we set it up for you, now you can deploy your code. For me, that's more like the traditional MSP model, right? Where you open a ticket, you say, I want to have this, and this, and then they create it for you. And they do management on top of that, right? They manage your make sure that it's connected to everything that it needs to be connected to, but it's very much gatekeeping driven. As in, you ask something, they look at it, they do exactly what you say. If you like forget to ask for like a certain firewall rule, then bad luck, open up a new ticket, right? Not because they don't want to help. Like I'm not like, I don't want to say that those people are bad at their jobs or like don't want to be helpful. It's more like because you're in that kind of workflow, like you just like have a lot of work. You're doing like ticket. You don't have time to come necessarily back to all those things if it's not in a ticket. Where like for next generation, we're much more looking at how do we use APIs? How are we like automated driven to speed up things, to be able to scale things, and to not have to be a gatekeeper for everything. Like there are still things that we like want to make sure of. Like, for example, we're providing backups. We want to make sure that your server is going to be getting those backups. But on the other hand, like if you want to use AWS Lambda or you want to use step functions, like we're not going to say, oh, we don't have like a ticket type for that, you can't create that. So like, okay, fine, we can, like that fits in our deployment process. We can use you can write your template yourself. We can write a template for you. We can then have a pipeline deployed in your account. And we'll do still a check on that to make sure that like if that needs backups, like does it have like the right tags to be backed up, stuff like that. But it's much more based on like that API thing. Like for example, for security is the same thing. Like if you look at traditional security, it's typically gatekeepers, right? Saying like, no, you can't do this. Like it has to be exactly like this or it's not allowed. And like we probably will do it for you because then we're sure that it will be done correctly. Whereas for more modern approach to that is saying like, we will put in some like restrictions on what the total things that you can do are. But then we will like look at like if you're creating S3 buckets, we will scan those buckets and look at the configuration of those. Like we don't need to like create all those buckets for you, but like we will let you know you created a bucket and it's not according to like this standard or like these policies. Like it's publicly available. Like, are you sure you want it to be publicly available? If you're not, like, okay, and then take it away. If you are sure, okay, let's document that. Let's put a tag on there that says, yes, we're sure that this like is for a website. It's allowed to be public. It's only public data. So it's I think it's that kind of difference between like traditional and next generation. It's like, are you like very much like that gatekeeper, or are you like working with those automations to make things happen?
So if you just join us, we're 23 minutes into another episode of Building SaaS on AWS. I'm Gunnar, joined today by Bill from AWS SaaS Factory and Ben from Cloudar. And we are looking at SaaS from a customer perspective today. So taking a bit of a different approach to what we normally do on the show, which is super exciting to hear Ben's side of things. And Ben, then if we look at it from your side of things, what are different types of SaaS products that you perhaps are helping your customers with?
I think there are like a few different kinds. I think the big distinction here is the difference between things that like we run centrally, like something that's for all our customers. And then we have the things that our customers are specifically want to use for their environment, right? So we don't work with like only standard templates. We work with like what does our customer actually need in their account. If they want to use a certain SaaS to build their product business or are using that in their business, then we will make sure that like that can run in their AWS account. And I think in that regard, we see like different preferences and different kind of products as well. Like for our things, or maybe I have to say I like very much things that I don't have to run myself. Where I can say, and like since we're doing mostly AWS stuff, it's usually like we will give you a role in our accounts, maybe like a central server somewhere where you can run something on, depending on what it is, and then you do your thing. We also have customers, and I've talked to like a backup SaaS that like also said like we have this request from our customers that are saying like whatever you do, we want you to start from our account. Like even if you're using like those like built-in AWS services, we want to have like a server in our account that you can put like network controls around, or where we can be sure that like if you're reading things and saving things locally, that's all like saved on like a disk in our account. So we see like those two big like size of a thing, like everything somewhere else, and then like the per customer or per tenant in our account or in the customer account things. And then like the things in between happen sometimes as well, where we know that it will be like a SaaS provider that's running tenant-specific software in their account. So that's like the main three things where we interact with.
Right. Yeah, and just again, speaking to the SaaS providers in the room, that's definitely a strong message you should be hearing. If you're early stage, especially, you're going to have customers who are, you're going to have to meet them where they are. Not every customer is going to accept, hey, this is how we deliver our SaaS product. Hey, you get as big as Salesforce, maybe you could do that, right? You can say, hey, you're going to use Salesforce, how we tell you you're going to use Salesforce. While you're growing your product, when you're talking to enterprise customers, they're going to bring specific requirements, and you have a choice. You can either choose not to serve those enterprise customers, or you can deploy things into their account. You just have to make sure you're pricing your SaaS product and setting up pricing tiers in a way that reflect the impact of that, because that will have a significant impact on your overall operations and business if you've got to deploy in those different models. So from a SaaS provider perspective, this is really important feedback, right? That you're going to see this. You're going to see different customers with these different models that they're going to put on you, and you have a choice to make there. Are you going to be responsive to those customers and keep those customers, or are you going to actually build this thing out, right, for all of their different choices? Yeah.
It's something that we see like at two levels. Like we have customers that say, like we want like you can run things for us. Like we want like a completely managed thing. We want to use a SaaS. It's going to be running. We know this is going to be running on AWS infrastructure. We want that being like you can manage the account completely. Like you can have full access to that. But we want to have the billing in our account, like we will have like savings plans, stuff like that. Like we want to use that on top of that.
Yes.
Like we might have an enterprise agreement, all those things. And then we also see that like as a service provider level, we're like independent of like all the different kind of accounts that they're having. Usually as a service provider, we also do reselling. And for us, it's much easier and we can do much more things if we're managing the management account, because we can do like SAPs and stuff like that. Sometimes there are policies at their company that say like the management account has to be our account, like no vendors can be in there. Like we manage it completely. So you have that on like two levels, both like on the individual accounts and on the management account. You have that like we want to have our own thing here. I'm not saying like everyone should do it that way, but it's also something that we do. We say like we can deploy like we want to manage everything for you. Like we want to manage that management account for you as well. And like do all those extra things that make like things that are, we can do extra in that account. But if you're limited in what you can do, like we will also deploy in your account directly and work with that.
So looking at this then from a SaaS provider perspective, and this is a question to both of you, should they focus more on the MSPs, have conversations with them and maybe understand their perspective of things?
I think this is like a very interesting question. I think it really depends on what you're selling, what you want to get out of an MSP. Mm-hmm. Like I like to talk with people all day. If you just want like to talk to me and have my perspective, like fine, let's go have like a drink somewhere and let's talk about like all the things we're doing. If you're actually selling to MSPs, like if your product is like going to help customers like do like all those things that are like on that MSP slide of like security and backups and like all that kind of like around that observability maybe, I think that's a good place to talk with MSPs. The thing that I would recommend against is starting as we're going to use MSPs as just like pure as a selling channel.
Yeah.
Right. You want like we like using SaaS products. We like to test them out first for our products. Like we want to know if this is like something actually like solves our problems before we go tell our customers. So it is in that regard can be like an extra hurdle if you want to go to that end customer. It is also like if you get over that hurdle, it's a good way to like immediately go to like a lot of end customers. Because either if it's like something that we know that like solves our problems, we just deploy it everywhere by default, or if it's something that we know that like can be that extra step up for our customers that like might not be in our baseline, but we can offer as like an extra service, like we do with some security products, like fire scanning, like real-time, what's called like hot patching and stuff like that. Like we sell as an add-on. We have like some partners in that regard. Then like it's a good way to get there. Like we can also help our customers with things like marketplace and like private offers in the marketplace. So like we know how that system works, but it is like you have to actually like provide the value first. Like you can't just go to an MSP and say like pre-sell our product for us, because we get those like you will get a lot of those questions, and like that's not always that helpful for our end customers. Like they don't want us to be a selling channel to them. They want us to like provide solutions to them. But if your SaaS product solves problems, which I assume it does, then like sure, yeah, come talk to us and like tell us how it solves our problems.
Yeah. I think that's a good perspective. Infrastructure SaaS might have more of a relevance, right, for MSPs in particular. How do you manage my cloud accounts? How do you secure my cloud accounts? How do you back up things? Like those type of infrastructure certainly have a play, but I would almost say it's a backwards go-to-market, right? Like find a customer and they will bring the MSP to you, right? Like if I'm selling to, right? That seems more like the model than like, hey, Ben, how can you help me sell my product? That feels backwards.
I think, again, here it's similar to how you would go to an enterprise. If you're a SaaS that's going to like that central operations, security, clouds, maybe even like a C-level team, then you should probably talk to an MSP, because they have like the same kind of concerns. If you're more selling to like data scientists directly, or selling to like developers directly, or like very solution specific things, then it's much better to go to the end customer and like then let the MSP help you with that SaaS. Like let them like tell them how to set it up, and like make sure that like have that ISO compliance thing, right? Where we can say like, yeah, this looks good to us. Like this is something that we recommend you using.
Well, and maybe that brings us into the topic of actually, well, procuring SaaS then. Is there like a wish list that you see your end customers coming to you with when they want to procure SaaS?
Yes, and I think there's like part of it is like things you don't really go without, and part of it is more like wish list. Like, and I think there's like a very good equivalent with picking an AWS region. Like the first thing, like if I have to pick an AWS region, the first thing I look at is which region can I use? Which is the same thing if I'm going to a vendor, I will have those GDPR questions. I will ask like, are you going to be in a European region? And if you're not, like, do you have like those processes that I need, those agreements that like allow me to send data outside of Europe? Like GDPR is complicated, like talk to your GDPR person internally, but like both options are possible. Just again, like what's more work? It's for me much easier to say, oh, it's in Europe, checkbox, like where the data stays there. And then like the other things are more like the more wishlist things, is like which servers are available, like what can your product do, and like what's the pricing? Like the same thing you look at if you look at AWS regions, like okay, what can I do within this region, and how much is it going to cost me to be in that region? For like more concrete stuff, I think like from the management or like process kind of stuff, like I can quickly show like the kind of questions that we ask our suppliers. I think that's more like those are things we need to know. Like, so the more you can answer here, and the more things like, and this is like it's a much bigger document, but like these are things we like to know about. So it is a wish list, in the sense that like some of those are going to be deal breakers. Like if you say like, oh, we don't know where we process our data, it's just somewhere, then we're not going to be able to work with you. Some of them are more nice to have, right? So so we have like that wish list of like, we have to like the vendor management thing. Maybe interesting to see is like we say, like if you're using ISO, then you don't have to fill out all those things. And I think the other wish list is more about how does it integrate and how secure is it. Like we like, and that's like more wish list for me, but like I want it to be secure. So that means like if you're coming to me with a product that starts with create an AWS access key or an AWS user and then attach the admin policy, I'm not going to be very like it's not making me happy to start using that product. It looks like it makes my life a lot more complicated because we have other requirements. So it's not that it's impossible, but now I have to think about rotation and like how do I manage that. The same thing if it starts with just click those things together. Like I much like, but like also in the product we have some wish list. Like that's more like about how does it integrate with AWS, but also have like requirements and wishes like how do we sign into this? And this is something that I think is very relevant as well if you're like again looking at those enterprises. Like can I use an identity provider? Can like integrate with SAML?
Right.
Is that something that will cost me more to integrate with SAML, or is it like included by default? Do you have Cloudar equivalent? Like, do you have logging in there? Do you have like monitoring there? Like, what are the things that I can see if I open that product? Like, how much can I manage this? Are definitely things that we look at as like requirements. Like if it's a single user product, that's just like you sign into this and now everyone can do everything. That becomes very hard to manage in some ways because at some point like things will change and you don't know who did it. So having those controls to be able to say like either like only those people can change things, or we can see what everyone did, or we can like manage this with infrastructure as code, are things that are definitely on our wish lists.
Yeah, a couple really interesting things there, Gunnar. I just want to talk to the SaaS providers about. One, SSO. If you're building your own identity provider, or if you're managing identity yourself, you're very likely to get into trouble with enterprise customers if you haven't thought about federation with their own identity stores out of the box. By the time you've reached that point, again, if you have a database somewhere with usernames and passwords in them, you're not going to be able to do the integration with them that they're going to need. It's why we often see, obviously, Cognito is the Amazon solution to identity providers, but also our partners like Auth0 have great solutions for doing this. In some ways, even better, right? Like I love our partner solutions in a lot of ways, and they make it very easy for enterprises. Yes, expensive, right? You're going to have to account for that price again in your pricing tiers, right? Make sure you understand when you bring on an enterprise customers and they have 1 million users that you're going to need to federate with, that the identity provider is going to have a cost associated with that. And the other thing, make sure you think about that tenant admin role. Like Ben is also representing your tenant admin person here. Like if you're selling your product, who from your tenant is going to actually have to do all of this legwork in terms of making sure user management is taken care of, making sure they can get analytics and logging out of your product. And if you haven't thought about that individual and what their life is like, this is kind of a nice little peek into someone's consuming your product. It's not just the end users. There's some sort of admin who's also responsible for the overall management of that solution. And if you haven't thought about how they're going to do that, start doing that today, because that's a real person in an enterprise and an MSP that's going to have to consume something else other than your end product to be able to manage your solution.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we see at customers as well, where like the first part is like, okay, looking at like RFP, buying the thing, features, stuff like that. The second part is then like using it, and then you get like into the whole operating, monitoring it, and like, oh, we're like using CloudWatch or Grafana or whatever for our monitoring, and the SaaS we're using that's now critical for our application, like only has its own internal dashboard. Sometimes that's fine. Like I'm definitely not saying like throw everything you're doing away right now and just like build monitoring and CloudTrail and like all those things. But it is something that you will get as a question, definitely from your like more enterprise customers, and say like, we have this tool already, this identity provider already, we have this framework already. How do we integrate with this? Like, can we get an API? Can we get logs shipped to S3, for example? Those things are like very interesting for like that last phase, where people like where actually that thing is like, are you going to make your customers happy if they're using your product, right? Like it's not going to be a deal breaker for me if I can't ship out logs from it. But if I run into a problem and I can look at the logs and see, oh, it was like only happened once, or like it's happening every day, like having that information in my own tooling, instead of having to like hope that like I can open a support request and like they can figure it out, just makes me more happy as an operator.
And that's the self-service part of SaaS that we often talk about on this show as well, allowing those SaaS customers to actually do things themselves. And logging, auditing, of course, is important in this case. Another topic that we always talk about as well is different deployment models and multi-tenancy. And I suppose that's also important, either from a wish list perspective maybe, or perhaps from the other perspective, that it's a deal breaker maybe. You'd mentioned it before with enterprises, Bill.
100%. Yeah. And Ben, I'll let you sort of give your take on this, but there are a few different models, right, that you've already even brought up about the idea of, potentially just having, this single, let me preach a little bit. Make sure you have a single code base across all of these models, in my opinion, as the SaaS provider. I think that's one of the quintessential definitions of SaaS for me, is you have a single code base that you manage. I know that not everyone follows that, but if at all possible. But, do you have, Ben, do you have like a single application, right? And you were talking about that. Like, is this a single app that everybody consumes? Is this an application that has multiple applications that are spread around? Is this, and then again, we get into these sort of like, do you actually have to, in some ways, have bespoke code per customer? And if you do that, is it possible to do that by configuration over, over actually going in and changing your code or having anything that changes there? So I think those are some of the options, Ben. But I mean, does that kind of reflect what you're seeing as well in the marketplace?
Yes, like I think, and this is like more something that we see if we work with our customers that are building SaaS, or to be honest, if you work with customers that are building SCADA, like industrial things, like the tendency to say like, oh, we have like 3 different plants all over the world, they all have slightly different needs because of local regulations and how the processes work and stuff like that, and then like build your system that manages that. Like you start with one plant and then like, oh, little features here, little features there. And then 5 years later, you basically like, we see them saying, oh, we have to start from scratch over again because like we can't manage this anymore because now we have like 10 plants and like it like big bug fix from the one doesn't go to the other one. So I don't think this is a SaaS problem. I think this is like a general IT problem. But as SaaS, you're like in a very good position to try to avoid that.
Yeah. Configuration over customization, I think, is the term that we like to use. And like, I'm actually working on a blog with Launch Darkly right now, in terms of this, right? That ability to say, we have a single product, we have a single code base, but we could have that unique customer experience or tier experience, whatever that looks like, without having to, and a tenant admin could go in and even make those changes themselves, right? I want these features turned on, I want these ones turned off potentially, right?
Which is something that we do internally in our managed services practice with our landing zone. Like we have different customers with different requirements. Some of them like will say, oh, but we already have a product for X, or like we don't need product X. And then we need to be able to say like, okay, fine, like we can still provide our services if you do it this way. And like we don't deploy this or we do deploy that. Like we have our own landing zone, which is built on top like the custom AWS landing zone solution, something that we run internally. We have customers that say like we want to use Control Tower for our accounts, and then we integrate with that. Like we still use the same templates, the same CloudFormation templates, but then deployed in different ways. Like we in Control Tower, we deploy it in the same way, but like it integrates slightly differently. It's like a different deployment process, but like we start from the same code base. Like I know every customer that we have. If I go look at like, is card duty enabled, it's going to be enabled. If I go look at what are the roles we create in there for like our management, it's going to be exactly the same role.
Yeah, maybe we can dive a bit deeper into your landing zone and how you're using it with your customers.
I have some slides about how we do it. Very quickly, like just in general, landing zone. It's a fancy name to say we have a bunch of central accounts, or we do central stuff in, and then we have a tool that will deploy the same thing in multiple different accounts. You can do this yourself. There are like tools like the AWS deployment framework, and I forgot the name of the other one. You can use Control Tower. We do this because we're already doing it for a long time. We were doing it before Control Tower was a thing. We have our own landing zone. They all work basically the same way, and which is like this. So whether you're using Control Tower or something custom, you have a bunch of CloudFormation templates, or in some cases maybe you're using Terraform. You will use CloudFormation stack sets in one central account, and then that stack set will deploy the same thing or your configurable thing, if that's what you're doing, in all the end user all the end customers account. So what you can see here is like we have here both like Control Tower can do this, our custom landing zone can do this, and then they will create stacks in that. Specifically for us, sometimes customers, or like always customers, because we're just not creating accounts to be empty, they still have like their own application, their own servers, their own step functions, Lambda functions running those accounts. Those are deployed like separately. Like those are not in our landing zone solution. Those are like a separate CI/CD pipeline that has like for this specific AWS account, these specific templates just for them. Like those are like customer specific things. The general things are coming from that landing zone, but the same way, like Bill mentioned, it comes from like a central Git repository, goes through code pipeline, or like in our case, we're using GitHub as well in some cases, or like as like the starting point, and then like that deploys all those stack sets. It's like a lot of complexity hitting in that Control Tower and custom landing zone icon, but like as a basics, that's what we're doing. Like we're deploying stacks, CloudFormation stacks in customer accounts, which means if you're like a SaaS provider, like tying it back to this, like if we can like integrate with your product by deploying a CloudFormation stack, that's great. Like we can just like take that and put it in there, which is something that I have a little demo from as well, if I talk fast enough. Which like one thing that we're using like for the central thing, for example, is like a SaaS. Like that's what we're talking is. One of them is Cloud Checker. We use a few other ones, but it's a good example of how we deploy it. So we have like the parts that we run those central accounts, and then we have like AWS accounts for every single customer, or multiple AWS accounts for all the different customers, and you have like that same CloudFormation stack set to CloudFormation stack environment that's happening here. So if we have to onboard a new SaaS, we have to like put a few more extra things in there. So we will start from like a central like CloudFormation template that defines that SaaS integration. Depending on the thing, this can be just a role. This can be a role with some extra resources. It can be something like, it depends a little bit on the SaaS provider. Sometimes they can provide it directly or have it like publicly hosted in S3 bucket. Sometimes this is like code we have to write ourselves. If they like don't have a CloudFormation template, if they use different ways to deploy it, we will like take their documentation and convert that into a CloudFormation template. I like when we talk about requirements, a thing I always do when we onboard a new SaaS provider is look at their CloudFormation templates, look at those IAM roles, look at the permissions, look at the external ID, like all those things that make it sure that like there's a secure connection between our environment and their environment.
Yeah, just to make a quick callback, Gunnar, I mean, we've had Epsagon and Dremio on the show, and both of them deploy significant resources into customer account, right? But they also, speaking to the experience Ben's talking about, provide really clear, obvious documentation with CloudFormation. I think in the case of Epsagon, they have like every infrastructure as code under the sun, right? They have Terraform examples. They have all of the different ways you can do this. And I think that's something that people should keep in mind for SaaS providers, that they should provide as much of that as possible. So Ben isn't over here like pulling his hair out, trying to figure out how your product is actually supposed to work, right?
It also depends, like, again, like what kind of SaaS you're building. Like if you're building something that's like, it's going to be like deployed over the whole organization, Like we have like, I don't know how many, like hundreds of accounts. Like that's not possible anymore by just like, I'm going to go in every account and click it together.
Right.
If you're building something that's going to be like deployed once, I'm still going to be writing in the infrastructure code, but like you don't have to like give me as many things. I can like put in the time as needed.
True.
The tricky part with everything that we have deployed here is like you also have to register your thing inside of the SaaS provider. So in this case, there's an API at the SaaS provider where we can say, create a new account in this. And we can also say like this IAM role is tied to that account. And that's basically the rest of this diagram where we create our own CloudFormation stack with those stack sets. That will have as a nested stack the original CloudFormation template that we deploy, in this case as a role. And then we have our own 2 custom AWS resources that will talk to the central API of that SaaS product. We don't run those integrations directly in that customer CloudFormation account because to talk with that SaaS product, we need API keys, stuff like that. And we don't want a customer-controlled account or a customer-owned account to have access to an API key that can potentially like access multiple customers or create or delete other customers. So we protect that by having like a central shared service account that we manage as completely ours. That's only exposed by an SNS topic, where that CloudFormation stack will send a message to that SNS topic that will then have a Lambda function that sends a request to the cloud provider, to the SaaS provider, say like, we want to create a new account. Use that to create a CloudFormation stack with like all the external ID and the account ID from the cloud, from the SaaS provider in there. And then once that role is created, we do like a second call to configure that. Which is this pattern is something that works very well. It is, you have to be a little bit careful about how you define external IDs. And like which external ID belongs to which account is like the reason that we have those 2 separate resources here, where we first say like, give me the external ID, give me the account ID, because since it's like a multi-tenant environment cloud checker, like every single AWS account gets its own external ID. Like there's no per tenant or like per group external ID because of that multi-tenancy. Like we are a tenant, and within our tenant, we can still divide more permissions in there. So you don't want to share the external ID between different places that might have different permissions. And similarly, when we do like the IAM role creation here, like this function or this topic is like protected with IAM permissions to be only within our own organizations. And we'll also check that like the RN that you're providing matches the account that you're editing to make sure that you're like not crossing those tenants' boundaries.
So this might be a philosophical question almost, but is Cloudar a SaaS? What you're offering your customers?
I think you have to be. I think in some like the whether you're like an MSP or you're like a cloud enablement team or your security team, if you want to be able to scale, you have to think like a SaaS. Like there's like we still like we do the consulting parts as well, and like there's still going to be like a lot of custom management stuff. Like we manage this whole account as well, or like per customer stuff that we're doing that I would say is not SaaS. But for things you want to be the same everywhere, I don't think there's a better way than like let's start it from a like central call. Like the one thing that I like very much about working with cloud is that everything is an API, which like gives you so much more possibilities of building those things centrally than like if you were like running on VMware and you have to like install like an agent on every hypervisor that you're running and like do all those things like very specifically on those things.
I don't think we've prepared this, but pricing wise then, is it SaaS-like there as well?
Yes. In multiple ways, in the sense that we like our pricing also evolved over time, but like for the managed services, we typically charge based on consumption. So it's just like it's a little bit split out for us. But the idea is like the bigger your environment, the more complex it's going to be, the more things we will have to do. And currently we're using costs, or like AWS cost, as a proxy for that. You could count the number of resources, but it's like very similar to how AWS prices, as in we have a metric that we count for your account, and that is then used to tell you how much you have to pay at the end of the month. We also have like a little cost, like we give like a lot of flexibility to say like, this is things I don't want to have monitored. These are things I want to like have included, not included in my cost, which means that we also have like a baseline cost for like, if you want to have someone, you can like, it's 24/7 on call for you. Like this is the baseline cost for that. Like the same way you have like tiers within a SaaS product. And then within those tiers, we basically measure like, these are the number of resources within that tier. Like you said, like this is something that's only for your development environment. Like you're maybe not counting that. This is your staging environment. You only want that like in the normal tier, that's like business hours. And then you have like your production environment, which is like 24/7. Like the charge for that is going to be different, but we just counted things and then we charge for that.
Yeah. It sounds a lot like SaaS, doesn't it? Like you're thinking the same thing I am. This consumption-based pricing. You've got a single version that you configure over customize, and you're managing on the customer's behalf. You're shifting the burden of managing that software off of them. Like you're like that close to SaaS. That was one of the things that jumped out at me as well. Is not only are you, what is that commercial? You're not only your customer, you're also like the owner, but you're also the client. Like you own your own SaaS and you're managing all of these SaaS products. It's a really interesting overlap with SaaS as an MSP, in my opinion.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think we're all just trying to like use the cloud in the most efficient way. Like if you're like building a SaaS right now, you're also using other SaaS services. Like right. Whether that's AWS services or, like you said, other partners. Like you're not reinventing identity in there. Everyone is just building on top of each other.
Yeah. Right. Time flies when we're talking SaaS, so we are reaching top of the hour. I think we got through quite a lot in this hour, for sure. Ben, if people want to meet you, want to meet Cloudar, where do they do that? You're based in Belgium. Did you mention that at the beginning?
Yeah, we're based in Belgium. We work internationally as well. Like we're not only doing Belgium, but like our office hours are Belgian. But we have customers like pretty globally. I will be at the AWS Summit in Amsterdam together with some coworkers. We will have a booth there. That's June 1st. So if you're close to Belgium, like that's a very good way to talk to us. And I've seen there's like a few links to our website as well in the chat. So cloudar.be is where you can find us as well.
Very good. I'll be in Amsterdam as well, so might meet both me and Ben there. Bill, you won't be in Amsterdam, I guess. You will probably be sleeping while the summit is happening. But
yeah, exactly.
People get to meet you here on Twitch instead. All right. Thank you, both Bill and Ben, for joining today. I've had a great episode of Building SaaS on AWS. And we will be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Bill, do you have the topic at hand?
I don't have it right here in front of me.
Oh man, but it is going to be a great topic. I am sure. We always have great topics. So, yes. All right. Thank you all. Thanks for watching. Thanks again, Ben and Bill, very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.